It was the summer of 1846, a time when thousands of Americans were leaving their homes in search of a better life out west. The promise of California, a land of gold, fertile soil, and endless opportunity, pulled families across the plains like a magnet. They packed everything they owned into wooden wagons, hitched oxen to the front, and began a journey that would stretch over 2,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and rivers. Among them was a group that would soon become one of the most infamous in American history, the Donner Party. At first, they were just like any other group of pioneers. They were made up of ordinary families, hopeful, strong, and determined. The party was led by brothers George and Jacob Donner, along with James F. Reed, a confident, ambitious man from Illinois. There were nearly 90 men, women, and children traveling together, all bound for California, where they dreamed of starting a new life. They couldn't have imagined that their journey would turn into one of the darkest tales of survival ever recorded. The first part of the trail went smoothly. They crossed the Great Plains, passed the Platte River, and followed the route known as the Oregon Trail, which had already been used by thousands before them. Spirits were high. Laughter echoed across the camps, and the families shared dreams about the new lives they would soon build. But their fate would change when they decided to take a shortcut, one that would cost them everything. That shortcut was called the Hastings Cutoff. It was a new route advertised by a man named Lansford Hastings, who claimed it would save travelers nearly 300 miles on their way to California. Hastings had never actually taken the route himself, but his book promised that it was faster and safer. James Reed, eager to reach California before winter, convinced the group to take it. The decision would prove fatal. In July 1846, the Donner Party left the main trail near Fort Bridger in Wyoming and followed Hastings' route through the Wasatch Mountains of Utah. What they didn't know was that the path ahead was nearly impassable. The dense forests, steep canyons, and jagged rocks tore apart their wagons and exhausted their animals. They spent weeks cutting through terrain that should have taken days. By the time they finally reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, they were already behind schedule and dangerously low on supplies. The Salt Lake Desert was a nightmare. The ground shimmered white under the sun, and the wagons sank into soft sand. There was no water, no shade, and no sign of life. For days, they struggled across the barren landscape. Oxen collapsed from exhaustion, wagons broke down, and people began to lose hope. By the time they reached the other side, they had lost dozens of animals and much of their food. The shortcut had cost them precious time and their survival. By early October, snow began to fall in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Donner Party was still more than 100 miles from their destination. They tried to push forward, but the snow quickly grew deeper, blocking the trail. They built makeshift shelters near what is now Donner Lake, hoping to wait out the storm. They didn't realize that they were about to face one of the harshest winters in California history. The temperature plummeted, and snow piled up to more than 20 feet deep. Their wagons were trapped, their oxen frozen or lost, and food was running out fast. Hunger began to gnaw at them day and night. They boiled leather, chewed on tree bark, and dug through snow looking for anything edible. The families tried to stay strong, comforting their children with stories and prayers. But soon, the cries of hunger drowned out everything else. By mid-December, the situation was desperate. A small group of 15 men and women, later called the Forlorn Hope, decided to leave the camp and go in search of help. They made crude snowshoes from branches and cloth and set off into the endless white. The journey would test them beyond imagination. For days, they trudged through blizzards, blinded by snow and weakened by hunger. One by one, people began to collapse. With no food left, they faced the most horrifying choice imaginable. To survive, they had to eat the bodies of those who had died. It's one of the most disturbing parts of the Donner Party story, the act of cannibalism. But for them, it was not madness. It was survival. Those who refused died within days. Those who could not bring themselves to eat starved slowly in the freezing snow. Only 7 of the 15 would survive and eventually reach help in California. Back at Donner Lake, the situation was just as grim. The families trapped in their cabins could hear the wind howling like a living creature. Snow fell endlessly, burying everything in sight. People grew weak, delirious, and hopeless. The dead were buried in shallow graves, but as food ran out, some were later dug up again. The children's cries turned into silence. The survivors clung to life, waiting for someone, anyone, to find them. In February 1847, after months of suffering, rescuers finally reached the camp. What they found was beyond imagination. Skeletal survivors, frostbitten, starving, surrounded by the remains of those who hadn't made it. Of the nearly 90 people who had set out, only 48 survived. The rest had perished in the mountains, victims of hunger, cold, and the cruelty of fate. The world was shocked when news of the tragedy spread. Newspapers across America printed horrifying details: the starvation, the snow, the cannibalism. It became one of the most infamous stories in American history, a grim reminder of the dangers faced by those who dared to chase the dream of the West. But beyond the horror, the Donner Party's story is also one of human endurance, of people who refused to give up even when nature itself seemed to conspire against them. Among the survivors were children who grew up to tell their story. One of them, Virginia Reed, later wrote a letter saying, "Never take no cutoffs and hurry along as fast as you can." Her words became a haunting lesson for future travelers. In the years that followed, the site of their suffering became known as Donner Pass. A monument now stands there, cold, silent, and eternal. A reminder of the price that was paid for exploration, ambition, and the hope of a better life. Historians have since studied the Donner Party endlessly, trying to understand what went wrong. Many agree that the biggest mistake was taking Hastings Cutoff, a decision born from overconfidence and poor judgment. But there were other factors too: the harsh winter, the lack of experience, and the cruel indifference of nature itself. Yet despite all of it, their story still echoes across time because it captures something deeply human: our relentless drive to survive. The Donner Party's tragedy changed how future settlers traveled west. Routes were mapped more carefully, supply checks became mandatory, and warnings about shortcuts were written into every guidebook. Their suffering saved countless lives that came after them. Even today, the story continues to fascinate historians, filmmakers, and storytellers. People still visit Donner Lake, walking the same frozen paths where those families once struggled for their lives. Some say the place feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. The silence of the forest, the stillness of the snow, it all feels like time itself is holding its breath. And yet, despite the darkness, there's something inspiring in their story. They may have faced unthinkable horror, but they also showed unbreakable courage. They were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, and their will to survive became legend. So, the next time you look at the vast landscapes of the American West, the mountains, the plains, the rivers, remember the Donner Party. Remember the families who dared to cross the unknown, and the price they paid for chasing the promise of a new world. Because history is not just about victories and triumphs. It's about the struggle, the mistakes, and the humanity behind it all. The Donner Party reminds us that hope can drive us to greatness, but it can also lead us into the heart of darkness. And as their story echoes through time, it still asks us one haunting question: how far would you go to survive? If you enjoyed exploring this dark yet powerful chapter of history, make sure to subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting. Stories that remind us of the strength, fear, and resilience that built the world we live in today.